panelists. We have Sri S.M. Vijayanand. You know that he has been, now he has been the secretary at the Rural Development Ministry, and now he's and the former chief secretary, and also currently is the State Finance Commission chairing the session. We have none other than Srimati Aruna Roy, with us, and Ravi Raman and Dr. Yamini Iyer. Okay, over to you, Sri S.M. Vijayanand. Thank you, and welcome all of you once again.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Welcome to my fellow panelists, especially Aruna ma'am, Ravi Raman, Yamini. I'm a little hesitant and nervous speaking when Aruna ma'am is going to speak next. But before that, let me say that I'm quite sad while speaking about NREGA. The whole thing, if anything can give some trigger to the rural economy, it is NREGA. It just mentioned in passing by Government of India in the Finance Minister's announcement. Not even 1 rupee has been added. No assurance that NREGA will be there. There seems to be some visceral prejudice, and that makes one sad. So, if NREGA has huge natural advantages if it is used as per the spirit of the Act. It is as per demand. It is as per need. It is for rural areas. It is for the poor areas. It brings cash flow to the worker, and it stimulates the local economy. It is doable. It was done several times. Somehow it has missed. And MGNREGS can be used for livelihoods, agriculture, animal husbandry, fisheries. It can be used for natural resource management. It can be used for poor infrastructure. And all this are not just giving cash. It is also building the economy, particularly capital investment, or I would call it, in the conventional sense, some investment for agriculture. And MGNREGS is for all poorest to the poor, elderly, differently able, even mentally ill. There are different ways of redesigning, which is provided in the law for designing NREGA for different sections of people, women, everything, so-called work study. And now the homecoming labor, they are all to be employed probably in another doubling of the current NREGA. But there are a lot of issues which I want to highlight. One is, over the years, it has become allocation based, which is against the letter of the law, let alone the spirit. Second, we have very funny notions about job cards, dormant job cards, Aadhaar, IT linkages, bank account. All these have added confusion of various sorts, but all of them can be sorted out. The huge arrears of wages, which never happened in the earlier days. I was there in Delhi for 3 years doing NREGA, but now it has become arrears of huge arrears. And then another big problem, because there then also so-called centralization of data. All this data goes up at the panchayat level, at the people's level. Nobody really understands what is happening. At the micro level, there is no proactive capturing of demand. It's a routine kind of thing, mostly decided by the BDOs. The Gram Panchayats by law are there. They're called the principal planning authorities in the rules, but they don't exist. They have a very, very vague role. And no participatory planning. They don't discuss which asset, which person wants, how it will not clash with the agriculture season. These are all simple local things which we have missed. And of course, weak human resources for the support system, even though every panchayat has a Gram Roskar Sevak and a technical assistant. And over the years, the accountability system, Aruna ma'am will testify to that, has been weakening across the country, including Kerala. And a lot of excluded labor, people who are in the villages who have lost work because there is no agriculture there, and the new homecoming labor, they are economically displaced. So all these people, now we have to restart the whole thing. How do we start? The first thing is there should be some, even a weak assurance from Government of India. All states down the line, they respond to signals, even if signals are not very strong. And in 2014, I was doing NREGA. Most states clamped down on words, thinking that the new government is going to stop NREGA. There was not even a word. But this kind of thing is there. So rationing will not be there. It's one assurance, at least for this year. I'm not saying forever. The Government of India says there is not going to be rationing, and symbolically double the allocation. This is not a big deal. will start. And on our part, let's get it started. Let's not wait for all these things to happen, and we can change on the go. That is the advice I would give. When this government took over in 2014, we launched an initiative called Intensive Participatory Planning Exercise. So politically, it should be acceptable even now. So you are using the IPPE, where you're going to the people and bringing them together, and the labor budget needs to be revised now. Labor budgets were prepared in December, after which the whole situation has changed. Total revision is required because it doesn't hold good. And Jharkhand at one point of time, thanks to the involvement of people like Arna Ma'am and Nikhil, prepared something called Kam Mango Abhiyan. People go and ask for a job that is linked to the plan. That is which is not. When we started NREGA, there was hardly an SHG in India except Andhra Pradesh and Kerala. Now, India has 60 lakh SHGs. 60 lakh SHGs, probably having about 6 crore women. These women demand, plan, coordinate execution, do concurrent social audit, and link their plan with livelihoods. And out of the 60 lakh women in SHGs, not 60 lakh, 60 lakh SHGs, large number, I would say about 50 lakh, are quite good. Then, the post-NREGA situation, the 14th Finance Commission has given 2 lakh crore, had given. And 15th Finance Commission has calculated will be, I don't know what will be the economy next year, but if it goes by the current trend, it will be 4 lakh crore for the panchayats. So there's a lot of untied fund lying around, which means at the local level, you can do a lot of coordination, much more integrated planning. The labor organization, organize the labor, because they need to be organized for different purpose, and reviving the cluster facilitation system, where civil society organizations were allowed. One important thing, one of the rare positives of this crisis is a lot of civil society organizations are back helping the people on their own all over India. I did talk to about 300 or 400 of them in different webinars, and they are doing very useful work. And if they could be used, they are willing. When I talk to them for reviving NREGA, you have a CFT. That part is very important. Then, government of India itself, again, this government, initially they called it life, now they call it Unnati, which means those NREGA workers, the children of NREGA workers, can be skilled and given a job. Skilling in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, they can do. And they have a target of about 2 lakhs or something in 2-3 years. But it's not, I don't think it has happened very well anywhere, including in Kerala. So that element also needs to be revived. And one of the rare things in NREGA, all the schemes since independence, is that it is the most research scheme. Research not by any simple grants, by very, very credible people and organizations. That has again fallen flat. We need to revive so that how it is helping. We need online kind of response from the people. Then the big question, I don't want to answer, I leave it to Arna Ma'am. How to diversify? Some people are saying, let us do farming and then marriage. One of the, because I was part of the discussions at that stage, when farming means the worker was got a modicum of freedom and go back to the farms, back to the landlord, and there could be huge moral hazard. So any kind of diversification will not affect the gains so far, economic, social gains, and it will not be, it will give additional work, not substituting existing work. And it will be the autonomous decision of the worker, and it should be boosting the livelihoods of the worker and not get locked up, and should avoid moral hazards. I know, ma'am, when we discussed, I think more than 10 years ago, in introducing certain services, if possible, in NREGA. I remember the late Gopalakrishnan leading the discussion from PMO. That is care services, care of the palliative, those who need palliative care, of the elderly. So on a very normative basis, if that could be brought in. So a lot of this care and compassion activities, mentally challenged children. So, and those kind of things could be linked to NREGA. And I personally feel, even if it is sent a message that the so-called health sub-centers, which are now renamed as wellness centers, could be one of the items of expenditure under NREGA. Madam, let me conclude. I will not take much time. One, to regain is a chance of regaining the importance of Narendra. After a very long time, I see emotional language used even by economists and not, and not leftist people alone, all other people on the sufferings of the poor. I've not heard it since the early 70s. So it's coming back. That opportunity, even hardcore media, they're saying something should be done. So we should use that opportunity to regain the importance, reclaim the space of the civil society as a support and advisory system, and build on the small but organic public action which has now happened in the COVID situation. Real public action, scattered, diffuse, may not even build up to a movement. And so that kind of thing is something we should look at. With this introduction, may I request Anna to make the comments. Not audible.
Srimati Aruna Roy, you please, you are muted your audio.
No.
It's okay.
No, we're not able to hear you.
ഷീജ എൻ്റെ വീഡിയോ വരുന്നില്ലല്ലോ എൻ്റെ
Dr. Ravidaman's video is not there. You're audible.
The problem is if Ravidaman's audio and video comes, it will be both will be bleak. Actually, in your case also, chairman's case also, right, audio was not very good. So Sri SM, can we call Dr. Yamini Iyer or Ravidaman? Ravidaman, hello. Ravidaman, could you please start? I suppose.
yes yeah
I start. In between, we'll sort out other issues. Yeah, please.
Thanks chairman and Vijayanand sir, and you have made a very good introduction that helps me to situate the way in which I really wanted to approach this whole world of Narega. I would say that of course we all know that it's a big legal entitlement, perhaps the only employment guarantee scheme that we have in India. My point first is that we need to have a new approach to Narega, in the sense that first of all, there is no point in seeing this as I think we shouldn't confine ourselves to.
Voice is still not coming. They're trying. They're trying. You have asked Ravi Raman to speak.
Hello.
Continue, Dr. Ravidaman.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so it should not simply be considered as an employment guarantee scheme alone. It's not just like that. It is something beyond that. It is a social protection scheme. So we need to be very clear about it. So first of all, when I say that we need to change our approach to Narega, I mean two things. One is this, that look, instead of seeing this as just an employment guarantee scheme, we go beyond that and see this as a social protection scheme. That is point number one. Point number two is that, as part of changing our approach to Narega, point number two is that, no risk I mean, whether it is flood or coronavirus or drought, anything of that sort, is class class non-neutral. It has its own class implications, caste implications. So it is not gender non-neutral. Uh, yeah. So the thing is that we need to have a very different kind of understanding about the differential impacts of this particular risk, that is coronavirus risk, on different communities. This is the second point I thought that as a beginning I would introduce. So first we change the premise from employment guarantee scheme to social protection sort of a thing. Secondly, we say that this is gender non-neutral, um, or class caste non-neutral, because it has differential impacts. And if we uh, go to the actual statistics, we find that whole lot of what is called intra differences, intra-state differences that one could find in terms of the performance of this NREGA. I mean, some states like Chhattisgarh or some other states perform well, whereas some other states are lagging behind. Of course, Kerala, of course, has been performing well. That is what I personally find from the statistics that I have. I mean, then one may obviously ask, how would you measure the success of this particular scheme? Normally, we measure the success in terms of the number of person days generated as far as the poor people are concerned. So based on that, we say that it has been a successful scheme. But at the same time, we ask a whole lot of other questions, particularly with respect to the wages, for instance. And we find that the wage rate is rather low when compared to the open market wage rates. For instance, in Kerala, we know that it is 291, whereas the open market wage rate for agriculture workers is as high as 600. So we know that there is a big wage gap in the labor market. And it is at that time, actually, we are devaluing labor. We are devaluing labor who are involved in NREGA. That's my third premise, in fact. So instead of devaluing labor, we should find a policy measure to revalue our labor. That's the third point that I thought of saying. Then immediately I have gone through, I have just worked out the loss of person days, or rather employment and wages lost under the NREGA scheme during April and May. I had just worked it out, and I found that the all India figure comes about, in terms of person days lost, it comes about 3,500 lakh days of employment, and the total wages lost is about 7,000 crores for the last 2 months. So what does it mean? It means that you need to go for a compensation package, and this compensation package should be either in terms of what is called giving extra days of employment in the subsequent months, or giving the wages lost. That is, they should be compensated in terms of the wages lost. What I mean to say is that because of two reasons. One is that unlike the other states in India, in Kerala you find that more than 90% of the workers are women workers, and majority of them are from the depressed castes. From the depressed castes. That is, there is over-representation of Dalits in the NREGA workforce. So what I mean to say is that since it is a moral economy crisis, it is not just an economy crisis. This coronavirus crisis is not just an economy crisis, it's a moral economy crisis. Specifically because it's a moral economy crisis, we need to bring in the moral elements in order to find a proper concrete solution for this. As part of bringing concrete solution, I would develop these two suggestions. One is either you compensate the days lost in subsequent months, or you compensate in terms of the wages lost. And we need to be very specific that it shouldn't be in the form of what is called unemployment allowance, because that's again far less than the what is called the wages that you are giving to NREGA workers.
Yeah, so the mute and unmute is not.
Yeah, which itself is much lower than the open market.
It's showing mute.
Yeah. So what is that okay? I mean, am I audible? I mean, it's almost over. I thought you have been hearing me. Hello? Hello?
Audible. You're audible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Clear.
So the thing is quite clear that look, I mean, we need to go for concrete solutions, and for which I would make a suggestion that you need to have a conceptual understanding of what's going on. I mean, without having a conceptual framework, then we would continue to say that okay, they should be paid more, or they should be given more days of employment and like that. No, that's not enough. That's what I'm trying to say. We need to place this in a very different conceptual framework, and that conceptual framework is what is called the moral economy framework. Why moral economy framework? Because here is a very particular situation where you find that there is an overrepresentation of the Dalits working in this particular non-accumulating domain. It's a very non-accumulating domain. I mean, you don't save anything, out of working in this Narega sort of activities. Never, ever. They don't save at all. So this is a non-accumulating domain where you find the over-representation of Dalits and Adivasis. And that is specifically why that you need to bring in the moral elements whenever you want to resolve the economic crisis. So at the moment, we should request the central government to announce a moral economy package in such a way that either the number of days lost should be compensated, or their wages lost should be compensated. I would obviously prefer the second one. Second one would be the most preferred, because it is specifically in that context that we would be highlighting what is called the job rights for the Narega workers. Thank you so much.
Now, ma'am, can you hear us? Unmute.
Yes, done.
I'm glad. Can you hear me, Vijay?
Yes, very clearly.
And thank you so much. And sorry for all these glitches. I am in rural Rajasthan, so you must forgive me all the failures of the mic and so on, and maybe many other things that will fail besides. So, want to begin with greeting all my fellow panelists. It's so nice to see you all in these times of isolation and all kinds of distance that have been imposed on us. Congratulations to the government of Kerala and Dr. Thomas Isaac for again being a first in organizing one of the first discussions by a government with the people on the possible alternatives and alternative ways in which we can look at a whole set of issues. I want to begin with a response to both the speakers before me by saying that we live in very unpredictable times. But one clear prediction that's been a possibility in front of us in the last 14 years or so of Narega is that processes always work, whether and principles have validity even today. Though we may not be able to predict exactly what will happen, the fact that there's been such an influx of migrants back to the villages, and in a sense where we run these very small NREGA unions in some villages where there were only women, they've now got men and boys, and it's doubled and trebled in size. So that shows a kind of need-based that NREGA actually, MGNREGA actually meets the basic needs of that community, and employment is a very, very critical need. All groups, we've been, of course, having so many discussions and so many discussion groups in the last 47, 48 days around MGNREGA and COVID. And all the groups working with MGNREGA agree that the present structure of the 100 days will have to be strengthened and sustained. And it should not be tampered with, because it's given us a legal frame within which we can really claim at least those 100 days. In fact, it should be made universal. And this universality, and it should be self-targeted as it has always been. But a new framework is required which must go beyond the structure to not only have open-ended employment, but to enjoy all the MGNREGA entitlements. You know, this act, as was mentioned earlier, has a significance far beyond its economic value. It's also been one of the biggest moral victories for the working class. We have never had any act passed which we wanted till this act was passed. It has really been a phenomenal victory of the self-defined needs of people. So, despite the fact that we'll want the universal self-targeted and income supporting programs to survive, how do we envisage it will affect us post-COVID? If we diversify to allow labor to be made available and expand the idea of how it can be used, it will, for one, empower the panchayat to diversify in many ways. How will it allow the panchayat to diversify? As Mr. Vijayanan mentioned in the beginning, we will have ability to have more services, not only caring for the elderly and the sick, and also doing the kind of checking post, I don't know how long this COVID virus is going to threaten our lives, but to take care of all the multiple ways in which we need to take care of ourselves. It will even enable distributing food for disbursement, cooking, and the third one would be health services. And I think these would be impacted by an enlarged NREGA. The second thing that I'd like to talk about productive activities for self-employment. We've had a very important and a very sharply focused range of activities, but now we can expand those activities. And when we look at rural development and development of other alternatives, including sectoral development of what is largely called industry, I would say that we should also look at kitchen gardens, homestead land, farmland, production of on their own farmland, in their own kitchen garden, in their homestead land, and also some things that we have really looked down our noses, which I have most certainly, is the whole question of handicrafts and other cottage-based industries, which have really been pushed into the hinterland of our consciousness for a very, very long time. The third one, which Jayati and Prabhat and Harshmandar had also suggested, is wage subsidy on enterprises, which yesterday Dr. Isaac also suggested, which Vijay has also been speaking about. But I think, how will you look at this wage subsidy on enterprises? One great fear, and I would really say I agree with the previous speaker, that in one sense, the moral victory of the individual worker has really been strongly suspect and become a part of the issue on which most greatest ire has been expressed by people who are big farmers, small industries, people who have exploited labor. So the power of the worker's decision and to go where he or she may want, she or he may want, and to get into a particular kind of industry must stay with them. So that's why I think what we need to do is to talk about that the decision to go wherever, to work in whichever industry, should remain with the worker, and the choice of enterprise must remain with the worker. And that's therefore the wage subsidy must go to the worker and not to the industry. So if it goes to the industry, they'll end up being bonded labor. And in that case, we'll vitiate so many of our dreams, beginning with the idea of employment and ending with the idea of freedom, freeing people from bonded labor, which has been, for most people on this panel, a great and important exercise of our lives. So I would really say that I agree also with Dr. Raman in this case, that the moral victory that we have gained through the NREGA will somehow has to be sustained by providing for all the possible ways in which we could be derailed. One thing about migration and the migratory, we cannot stop migration. So no matter what we say, people are going to come from Bihar to Kerala or go from wherever to wherever. So Kerala, I think, would be a very, very wonderful place to begin an experiment on how individual job cards could be used in any part of the country. Why should it only be used where they are? Can it be used as a part of the workforce's empowerment in terms of migration to various places? Can it be used in another state? It's something we'll have to look at. Then there is the whole issue of urban employment guarantee. I don't know, in Kerala, your village and your city are cheek to jowl, but in many cases it's not so. The urban area is very clearly defined. So if you can get your local bodies to look at urban employment guarantee, there are many drafts floating around. If we can look at these urban employment guarantees, which we have been demanding vociferously by many organizations of which I am a part, are asking for it. Again, Kerala could be the first to look at an urban employment guarantee program. State government gives a guarantee for a part of the remaining work days. For instance, 100 days are now guaranteed. 150 days, the government of India can stretch. What about the other days? So we think if they can raise resources through small taxes, dedicated sources, and for cesses, for instance, surcharge on fuel, we go by the example of the Maharashtra Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which really raised and which still has funds in its Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme, still has a huge fund which is raised through all these small taxes, some little bit on the fuel surcharge transferred itself onto a bus ticket. So little things added up to a great amount of money. In Kerala knows how to deal with the imaginative and creative taxation. So I think we have to look at these possibilities of how to fund this. I don't think we should over depend on government of India, because with the way they are now, with the PM Cares fund in secrecy, where there is no transparency of that fund, where there is federalism has been so badly hit, where states which are functioning resources, I think in some way we'll have to look at raising local resources. And we also have to look at some things like the New Deal. And that's where another alternative and the expansion of MGNREGS comes, because with Roosevelt's New Deal, he not only brought in massive employment programs to address depression, but he also allowed people to do whatever they could. So they painted and they crafted and they did all kinds of things. I went to the University of Illinois once to talk, and I found the whole university, half the university was built during New Deal. Walls were painted at that time by artists. So why can't we think innovatively and creatively? And again, I think no better opportunity than Kerala, where there's a history where walking through Trivandrum, I saw your entire wall of one of the walls of a very major building painted by the artists of Thiruvananthapuram. So where that kind of spirit of sharing art, which is not a collector's item, but it is a work of the people with the people, I think, and you bring in an entirely new concept. And ultimately, I think the People's Plan, which has been the basis of Kerala's participatory approach, going back so many years, of which Dr. Isaac and Vijay, Arvind, and many others in this room, whom I can't see, were part of, I think we go back to the notion of a participatory process. And that process, I promise you, will always work. And since Kerala started another participatory process today, and in inviting us to offer our comments and our suggestions, you have really opened up again to getting voices of the people. One major big hole for me is that this COVID has put us into these isolated rooms where we lock ourselves up and we can't really meet anybody. And the basis of the NREGA, I mean, for me, was walking through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of villages, talking to workers and peasants and asking, what do you want? And everyone said, we want employment. And that's how it consolidated into an MGNREGA, and it became their idea, their concept, and their law. But how are we going to talk to the migrants? How are we going to find out what exactly is their priority list? And finally, how are we going to impact and demand public health? How are we going to impact and demand that there is a state commitment to welfare? How are we going to think of a new welfare program, a welfare state? And in that, MGNREGA plays an extremely important role as social security and also as an employment guarantee. Thank you so much, and thanks for bearing up with the glitches of my connections. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Just one clarification. Kerala has been running an urban employment guarantee scheme, exactly a replica of NREGA in its urban areas. Not too big, but it has been running for nearly 10 years now. Okay. Now,
we would like to see what it looks like. Please do share it with us.
Sure. The guidelines are the same, but it's not so intense, except in rural kind of municipalities. I may request Yamini to leave her comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vijayanand, and to GIFT and to the Kerala government for inviting me to be part of this very, very important deliberation, and to have the opportunity to listen and learn from so many people since the morning. I thought as Mr. Vijayanand, as you were speaking, I was reminded of a conversation I had with Nikhil, actually, probably at least a decade ago, when he I don't know, when he sort of mentioned as we were talking at that time, I think it was about the right to information, that after 5 or 6 years of closely engaging with the implementation of NREGA, that he actually fears for the political life of the right to information more than he fears for the political life of NREGA, because it has so deeply seeped into the everyday lives of rural India in a way that no politician will ever be able to reverse it, although they will do everything in their capacity to try and undermine it. And reversing the gains of the right to information is more vulnerable than the gains of NREGA. And as you were talking, I was reminded of that conversation, because in the last 5 or 6 years, a lot has been done to try and undermine and reverse the gains of NREGA, repeatedly so. Same time, every crisis, every moment reminds us that, in fact, MGNREGA is the lifeline of the Indian welfare state, and is the lifeline of the lives and livelihoods, which the phrase that has now become so popularized in our public discourse. But it is actually NREGA that is the lifeline for these lives and livelihoods, and that is the backbone to which we always return in moments of crisis. So I think even though the power structure always seeks to find ways of undermining what potential NREGA has, the people always fight back, and that gives me a lot of hope for what NREGA means to India, and most importantly, what it means for the architecture of of the foundations of what a welfare state is. The other element of NREGA that has really been brought home to me very, very starkly in these last 48 days of the lockdown, in ways that I always understood theoretically, but not enough, but not enough from empirically, or from understanding what it truly means to individuals, is what NREGA is defined in terms of what it means for dignity and rights of workers. And what we have seen unfold in these last 40 days, as India has been stripped of its right to work, and workers of India have been stripped of their dignity, what this really brings home is how critical the narrative of dignity and rights is to how we frame our citizen-state relationships, and how we frame the foundations of our welfare. And there is very little in how we talk about welfare when we talk about it as an income transfer or a universal basic income, which has now become the flavor of the day, that can actually ever make up for the fundamental core of what the articulation of NREGA, which is an institutionalized form of ensuring that rights of workers are protected and that the dignity of labor is protected. So I think that to me, these are the two most important things that give me some hope for what the post-COVID future is going to be, because I feel these 48 days have been a very important reminder of how deeply rooted a program like NREGA is in the everyday lives of rural India, how central it is to our welfare architecture and to preserving the lives and livelihoods of people, but also, most importantly, that it gives us a grammar through which we can talk about rights and dignity of workers in ways that we lack if we didn't have this framework. The challenge, of course, is how do we build on this? I think the experiences of the last 48 days, especially the horrific injustices that have been unleashed on India's workers, I'm quite convinced today that a lot of people who are walking back home are not just migrant workers, but but they are families, people who've been stripped of their incomes and their jobs and are now facing uncertainty, who are going back home to reclaim their dignity and their lives. So I think that the challenge that India is facing is not just about migrant workers or a class of workers, it is about workers as a whole. And that as we look forward, we should be looking at workers across all its subsets and building a rights discourse in a much more robust way than I think the public discourse thus far has, as we classify workers, as I too have done in my own writing, as migrant workers and others. It's workers who are confronting chaos and uncertainty, and this requires us to think much harder about how to reshape labor capital relations as we go forward. And again, NREGA gives us the foundations through which we can begin to have a conversation about what institutionalizing the rights of workers actually means. And I think that's the grammar, that's the language in which we need to build this discourse going forward. One of the issues I did want to highlight it sort of relates to this larger question of the relationship between local governments and NREGA. And I think it's always been a slightly fraught one, not so much in states like Kerala, but even though in its conceptualization, NREGA was really going to be about strengthening the role of panchayats in ensuring in protecting the right to work of its of citizens. In actual practice, this has been one of the most ignored and emphasized aspects of the implementation of MGNREG, to its own detriment, I feel, in the sense that, if you look back to the early days, the law itself very clearly talked about the shelf of works, etc., the participatory plan, all of which was to be built, all of which was to start at the panchayat level and then move up through the administrative system. 50% of works were to be implemented through the panchayat. But in actual fact, the emphasis on building the capacity and capability and the robustness of panchayats to be able to perform these functions, I think always played a secondary role. And over the years, as we began to ask questions about how do we expand the shelf of works, how do we draw on NREGA to think about it as a scheme that can contribute to the larger to other elements of the broader elements rather of the rural economy, the phrase convergence became very, very popular within administration. And while that convergence may have led to potentially a more efficient implementation of NREGA, I think what convergence did ultimately is to significantly undermine the role of local governments, particularly at the panchayat level, to actually draw on what NREGA had to offer in terms of its ability to strengthen participatory planning and ensure, and actually linking back to what Aruna ma'am was saying, giving workers choice of where and how and what they would want to work on and work with. So I think that this is a very important opportunity. One of the positive things that COVID has done across many state governments is that it has reminded state governments that you can't fight a disease like COVID, which is so localized, and its impacts and what the consequences it unleashes on the social and economic lives of people is also so localized, without strengthening and bringing in local governments into the strategies for how one needs to address the challenge. And in fact, the nature of the challenge is such that it is pushing governments to think much more in terms of integrated planning. And I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is what needs to be done, what kind of parallel movement needs to be put in place to strengthen the capacities and capabilities of panchayats to be actively participants in the process of designing and implementing NREGA in ways that make more sense for the context in which the program, for their own particular context. And that means initiating a very robust set of debates within panchayats about the nature of the rural economy, about the nature of the lives of people, many of whom are coming back into the rural economy, and how best to leverage the opportunities that this may create, and for NREGA to be drawn as a very important source through which this can be leveraged. Of course, this comes with many challenges because mobility is constrained, and the ability of the system to sort of initiate new campaigns and new plans are going to be limited as everybody is racing to deal with the immediate challenges of COVID. But I think this is an opportunity, and an opportunity that must not be lost. And it's a fight that should be very much part of the fight for dignity and rights that this COVID, the lack of laid bare for all of us. And I think here Kerala has a very, very crucial role to play as a leader, a sort of leadership role to play in enabling other state governments to move fast. And it also means, I think, a lot more engagement with the Finance Commission. One of the speakers before me had mentioned the Finance Commission grants for panchayats, one of the for rural local governments as well as urban local bodies. One of the challenges with that, as we have experienced while we were studying the flow of funds for the 14th Finance Commission, was that in fact the participatory plans, while very critical in terms of what they sought to achieve, also serve to become a bottleneck in the movement of money. And the performance grants for the 14th Finance Commission slowed down in many states that weren't able to put together weren't able to deliver the participatory plans in ways that Ministry of Panchayati Raj and Ministry of Finance had conceptualized. Or at any rate, it was used as an excuse. Drawing on Finance Commission funds in ways that don't build these bottlenecks, but at the same time can use these funds to really strengthen the participatory planning process at the panchayat level. That's a challenge that I think has not been resolved in many parts of the country over several decades of trying to strengthen local governance. But it's one that confronts us at a very critical time, and one that I think we should put our collective thinking and work towards, because this is an opportunity. This is, I think, a rare opportunity in what has been a drought of opportunities to regain the conversation about the strength of local governance and how critical local governments can be in protecting the dignity and rights of Indian citizens. So I'll stop there.
Response to some of the points made. One, Professor Ravi Raman said it's a social security scheme. But in Delhi, there always been arguing it's an economic development scheme for the poor. The social security is seen as something secondary. And there was one finance minister, not of the NDA government, who said it's just dole. NREGA is a dole and should not be continued. So it's not social security, it's economic development with all the associated things which are related to moral economy, which Yamini have said. Second, MGNREGS is actually a bundle of rights, not just right to live, right to equal wages, decent work. I can go on and on, but that we see. Then something which I recall, Mr. Jairam Ramesh always used to say, NREGS has triple objectives: strengthening the right to work, creation of permanent assets, and third is strengthening panchayats. So he said this is triple objective or a trilemma. It's something which refers to what Yamini was saying. The last point I want to say was, I've been trying to think, not to articulate. It's time that the local governments of Kerala shifts from a welfare state mode to a caring state, which is more individualized, more outreaching, and more merged. So just a philosophical thought. Now let us go to questions. If Professor Joseph has some questions received by now.
We have a few comments. I think one comment is with respect to Kudumbasri. I think perhaps we can postpone it for Mr. Raju or Raju. I think Mr. Raju, this issue about Kudumbasri better raise tomorrow because we have a special session on Kudumbasri. Ramit Basu has a comment saying that MGNREGA should be looked at beyond wages, which has been the chief rhetoric all these years. The key objective of the scheme was to rejuvenate the lost, I suppose, to rejuvenate the lost environmental balance and stop forced migration. Comment 2. Villagers returning from the cities to villages can be fruitfully employed in rejuvenating the lost biological diversity, create employment, biodiversity-based livelihood opportunities through MGNREGA. In PESA areas, the Gram Sabha can plan to preserve and propagate the natural resource in a way that can lead to overall environmental improvement as well as livelihood. We need to find a way to marry the provisions of the PESA Act of 1996, BD Act of 2002, FR Act and MGNREGA Act, which are all for environmental protection and livelihood promotion, so that a convergence emerges, whatever. Vinitha making a remark. Job rights for the MGNREGA workers, employment guarantee, social protection, very valid points. Okay, I think I will stop here. Thank you very much. These are the kind of, I think, concern with the environment along with.
Comment that, yeah,
That's right.
ultimately now there is more and more thinking, even in the context of COVID, that environment needs to be built back, nurtured back for local livelihoods. So I think it's very valid. And another interesting suggestion, linking PESA, which gives powers to the Gram Sabha, MGNREGA, which gives work and from the Gram Sabha, and FRA, which means a lot of livelihood opportunities. And it can be linked, and you can work in the forest in common lands. It's a very good idea. It needs to be operational. Now I'll come to Arna ma'am for your concluding comments.
I think, I mean, I can't say how interesting it has been to hear Dr. Raman and Yamini, of course, who's an old friend, and we have shared many a protest and many a walk together and many a social audit together. And I understand that it's not easy. And with MGNREGA, people have had an immense faith in the program, as she said, and they've also had the only established relationship with the government where they had dignity and where they had some semblance of equality. In all other relationships, they were always at the receiving end. So I think what the MGNREGA has done in terms, Dr. Raman, in terms of social dignity and welfare has been enormous. I agree with you. But what has been always against us is the petty bureaucracy and the establishment, which has wanted to destroy us. But no matter what, again, I go back to Yamini and I go back to all the other things that we've always believed in, that actually they have not been able to destroy us. With all the political ill will, it has not been destroyed. With all and in fact, in many places, all political parties claim that they gave the MGNREGA at the time of elections. So it was to actually win an election. So I really think we need to ensure that this structure delivers again for us. And that's a challenge, I accept, but it's not impossible. And I think I go away with this, what I take away now is a great deal of positivism that we can make it work. There will be diversities in terms of ways we approach it. And I think some of the issues I raised, which I hope Kerala deals with in its planning, will help all the states happening in their states and help us lobby with our governments so that we can get such things happening elsewhere. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I don't want to take too much time because I think I must let the others also wind up. And I hope we'll continue this conversation beyond this TV screen. I mean,
thank you. Can I come to Professor Ravi Raman?
Yes, please. I mean, yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. This idea of linking what is called the PESA and the Forest Rights Act with the NREGA and sort of things are excellent. But the point is that, if we continue to retain this labor with within the what is called the low wage sector, then what exactly would be the future of those communities? I think that's a point that we need to think about when we really want to socially transform the communities. I mean, if we continue to confine them to the what is called the low wage segments, then I think the future wouldn't be that bright. So the point is that, we need to know that in what way the economy is being disembedded from the society, and in what way that these people are continuously being devalued in their everyday activities. So that is something which is to be reversed, and that could be reversed only and only if we have a completely different framework, completely different conceptual and ideological framework. And that's why that I thought that we need to go for a very different intersectional sort of an approach. Without having an intersectional approach, or without bringing this intersectionality, we wouldn't be able to understand the fact that these people are subjected to multiple layers of both oppression and exploitation. That's the point. It's not just a question of keeping low wage segments alone. Apart from that, they are being oppressed through various means. So it is the particular way in which that they are subjected to multiple layers of oppression and exploitation that we need to find a solution. And that solution, as part of the larger social transformation, should be in the form of what I would say by going for a completely different moral economy framework.
Thank you. Yamini, any concluding remarks?
Just one sort of point, I think, in response to what Mr. Raman said, that I think, one of the realities of NREGA that I don't know that it gets it's as well understood, is actually the impact that it had on the labor market, especially where it has been implemented well, and that's and on wages, and that's one of the reasons why local elites actually have a complicated relationship with NREGA. So I don't think that NREGA is about how it's commonly understood as a keeping people digging holes. It's very much it's actually much more complex than that, and in its framing, because it is framed in the language of rights and dignity, it empowers labor in ways to strengthen its bargaining position vis-a-vis capital in ways that I think very few other traditional social safety nets can, and it is for that reason that its integrity must and needs to be preserved. But of course, this is also an opportunity for us to draw on everything that we have learned of what works and what doesn't work in the complex labyrinth of implementation, and where strengths and limitations of the existing state capacity and implementation architecture are. And I'm hopeful that at some point, when we are able to exit from our spaces of isolation, we will be in a position to have a revived and robust conversation of what we learned from at least the 10 very robust years of implementing NREGA across the country, and how we can draw on those learnings to strengthen what NREGA has to offer, and in light of very new changes and social transformations that have taken place over these last 15 years since the law was first passed. Just one last point that Mr. Vijayanand had brought up, and I forgot to mention in my initial remarks. I think one of the most exciting things about NREGA, especially in the first 5 years of its implementation, is the kind of community it built up, the community of activists, the community of researchers and academics, the community of bureaucrats, of politicians and others, who were all actively engaged in understanding, critiquing, evaluating, studying, and participating in the discourse on it. I don't think there has been a welfare program, at least in the 20 years that I've been actively engaged in public policy, that has attracted this kind of multi-stakeholder scrutiny, if you will. And I think that scrutiny only made us richer. It was a reminder of how important it is for different aspects of society to come together to better understand critical elements of policy. and how effectively it can contribute. And of course, there were many moments of tension, and no government likes to hear critique, and any kind of dissent always found ways of being curbed. But benign neglect on the part of government allowed for this community to rise and to flourish. And I think that the last 10 years of this community not being as active has only been to our disadvantage. And perhaps this too could be an opportunity for rebuilding a similar multi-stakeholder community that actively engages in debate and dialogue, not just on NREGA, but on many of the larger fault lines that COVID has exposed in our state and in our society, for us to debate, dissent, critique, agree and disagree for a better future.
So thank you. Very fascinating discussion to be expected from such a panel, eminent panel. An odd combination of one bureaucrat and three activists. So, excellent thing. The two
Mr. Vijayan, you know the bureaucrat activists that we have learned from.
So to tell Professor Raghuraman, the reality in most of the backward parts of India, NREGA wages are higher than the real market wages in agriculture in most parts of India. At least that was the situation 3 years ago. Then second, a slight disagreement with Yamini. You said it was benign neglect by government. I worked for 10 years in NREGA. It was always active encouragement from government, which got all the studies, all the meetings, discussions. Anyway, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks, for the panelists. Thank you. Over to gift. Over to you.
I hope I'm audible. I think the panelists are still around. Thank you, the chairperson and the panelists, for such an enlightening discussion on an issue of much pertinence today. Thank you once again. I think